first of all ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Nompumelelo Mohohlwane. I am a researcher at the Department of Basic Education, but I'm currently working there as the Director for Reading.
Hey, Director for Reading. That's an interesting title, isn't it?
Very interesting title.
Yeah. And I know last time we spoke about the data lab that's been established in South Africa. Could you tell me a little bit about, just in simple terms, what is a data lab?
Sure. So the What Works Hub group has identified what they're calling an ed lab, education lab, I guess. And they are thinking about different typologies. So one that is based within a government department, one that is outside the department but established to support a department. And then the third category is sort of more hybrid, where an advisor or university acts as capacity for an education lab or for a government. In my case, the South African Department of Education has a directorate that is called Research Coordination, Monitoring and Evaluation. And it is an in-house state-funded lab that was established 15, 20 years ago, along with the rest of the department. And while we work with external people and work with experts and academics, the big distinguishing feature is that the DBE has its own lab that's internal and where the staff is internally paid.
And why does that matter? Why is it important?
Having a education lab in general is a important strategic decision, because we all are increasingly, thankfully, moving towards the use of evidence to make up policy decisions. And in our case, the majority of schools are public schools. And so the work that the department does has a significant impact on the majority of children. But when you have an internal lab, what is great about that is that you have the ability to focus work on one area for a sustained time. If we were a university or an externally funded lab, funding could run out. There could be a discussion about there's science now, why are you still working on reading, etc. But having an internal lab with the same people appointed as permanent employees means that we can focus on the same kind of topic for an extended time. And the second part is we're able to read and translate policy needs and gaps more easily, because we function as a support function to curriculum, teacher development, and assessment, but we are embedded in the system. We don't need to be called in as consultants for work. We are in-house. We're part of the normal DBE structure.
And I know when we spoke last time, the lab was already being used, data was already being taken, and it was being used to inform policy and then implementation. But how has that progressed in the past year? So have you seen some of that data actually go on to influence positive change within the education system in South Africa?
Yes, so I have seen that particularly with my shift to being the director for reading. My mandate is implementing and creating strategies for the successful implementation of reading, working with the curriculum colleagues on both decoding and the skill of reading, as well as literacy promotion. So it's been super helpful that I have this extensive background in developing the evidence for what should work in reading. And between ourselves and curriculum, so research, reading, and curriculum, we've been able to successfully use a national survey that measures precursor reading skills like letter sound and oral reading fluency, and go from just having a survey to using those results and the benchmarks we had developed for testing that, using that to inform textbook development. So in terms of early grade readers for children in grade 1, 2, and 3, the benchmarks have been used as a guidance. So we are saying to publishers, the kinds of stories you are writing need to be structured in a way that they'll help children reach these benchmarks. And even as we're speaking to curriculum on their teacher development and training, they say to teachers, this is the status quo from the survey. This is how many children reach the benchmarks. This is how your teachers need to structure their work to help children move along and reach benchmarks. So we've seen sort of going from, we have a national report on reading outcomes to what does this mean for teachers, for textbooks, for reading promotion. And yeah, that's been quite encouraging to see that sort of disaggregation and system strengthening based on the data that the research team collected.
And have you had feedback from the teachers? Like, are they finding that data useful? Are they changing their behaviors in the way that they teach literacy?
So our teachers were quite responsive. We had a teacher pilot with this data, showing them how it works, how they should think about interpreting it. And they identified further areas of work, actually. So the part about identifying where their children are and being able to group them, that correctly diagnose them so that they can support them differentially was successful. But they then said it's not enough to just have information, that actual behavior change needs a lot more support. So the one thing they said is the passages we were giving them are too few. So if you have a large class of 40 children reading the same story, by the time they're on the fifth child, they're no longer reading, they're reciting the story from memory. So that's a need for more assessments. And then the second category was, what does remediation look like? So we need to help them think through how to respond to where children are. And then the third category of things they said are more structural, like they have large class sizes in some cases, 60 children, and the ask of saying they should assess every child individually is not obtainable in a context like that.
So is that then, like, because it's really interesting to hear about the full loop, because often when you hear about evidence, you hear about that going into policy, and then you hear about it impacting how a policy's made, but you don't often hear that you've then got that full loop where that goes into implementation and the people on the ground actually feeding back to those creating the evidence and research, which must be massively positive, because the people on the ground have a very different experience often to those creating the research. So you can't easily know that the information you're gathering as a researcher or as a data analyst is actually what's needed. So is that actually changing and influencing the data that's being gathered and the information that's being gathered to better support those teachers in making those changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a big education for all of us, and a big evolution between when we started collecting this large scale data years ago, where our focus was exactly what you're saying, generation of evidence, with the idea that we would just come up with a report with recommendations and call it a day, to moving beyond that, to working on the implementation side with curriculum. What does actually integrating this evidence mean? To actually, who's our target user? It's teachers, and what do they want and what's their feedback. It's informed, we're probably in our third cycle now of responding to the information we gathered from them. I think it's part of what has motivated us to focus on reading for so long, that it's not actually a linear process, that it's not a one-time iteration, and that as you get more and more invested in it, you see bigger gaps and needs, and they're different from where we are to where teachers or even provinces are.
It's really interesting. Um, And I know that you were one of the authors on the GEEAP literacy report
Yes.
as well.
Uh-huh.
Can I ask if the kind of, I suppose, the evidence, I don't know how to say it, but the evidence that
Mhm.
was gathered, or the recommendations through bringing together of evidence that was gathered through the GEEAP endorsed literacy report, um, has that also helped inform your approach to literacy within South Africa?
So initially the GEEP work was more consolidating what we do know already about reading. And the question we were trying to answer is, does what we know from the global north have resonance or applicability in the global south? And South Africa was one of the countries we considered. And it was both a resource and design piece, global north compared to global south, but also a difference in the language structures. Because the languages are so different, what lessons can we have as common? And what are the distinguishing features? And I think what was new and a contribution from that work, which I've now taken on board, has been that there is a lot to learn. We are reading across different language types. Even I think in the GEEP report we had Arabic, we had multiple languages from India, and then we had alphabetic languages. And in all of these languages, there are lots of common factors that all of us should be taking into consideration when we design reading interventions or programs. But I think the report also meaningfully engages with differences and is helpful in framing how you should deal with these differences. What are the distinct features and what's a productive way to address them? So that's been something I've been able to take forward.
Wonderful. And if there's one piece of advice you would give to other people in a similar role in another country around improving literacy in their country, what is the one thing? I know there'll be lots of things, but what is the biggest thing you would want them to take away?
I would say the one part is coherence in whatever programming you're doing. And coherence means your materials need to speak to your teacher training, needs to speak to your assessments. Often we're very large systems, so you're having multiple levels, multiple organizations, multiple philosophies. And unfortunately, that lack of coherence often plays out in the classroom for a teacher. So I'd say the thing to hold constant is coherence, yeah, so that all these pieces are actually complementing each other and not contradicting each other.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Charlie.